Hey, for this activity, we're going to practice converting fractions, decimals, and percentages back and forth. So can we take a fraction, convert it into a decimal, and then take that decimal and turn it into a percentage? And that sounds overwhelming. It's actually not that bad. I'll walk you through it, show you the steps, and give you a lot of practice with it. But one place we actually see this out in the real world is in sports. So this activity is all about what your job could be as a sports analyst. Just so you know, as a fun fact, I looked this up. The Seattle Seahawks sports analysts and sports analysts in professional sports can make over $100,000 a year doing this job. So if this is something that you end up enjoying, it might be what you look farther into in math. But I'll read you through this first page. I'll walk you through how to find fractions, decimals, and percentages. And then I'll kind of explain all the different stats, all the statistics you might be looking at, so that even if you're not a giant football fan, you can still do this activity without it being crazy hard end of the world. I don't get it. But this page says, you have just been hired as the new sports analyst for the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks have not won the Super Bowl since 2014. In order to become a better team, the front office for the Seahawks is looking to make some changes to the team's strategy. In order to know what areas of the game the team should focus on the most, they've hired you. As the team's sports analyst, it will be your job to look at and analyze the statistics from their 2022 season. You will be responsible for finding trends in the data that have resulted in the Seahawks winning or losing games. So that's all you're doing. You're looking at all the possible things that happen in the game. What things happen the most when we win? What things happen the most when we lose? We're not going to get all the way into everything that could happen. We're just going to look at some very basic things today. But as we look through it, we'll find the easiest way for us to find the data and write it down is as a fraction. The easiest way to understand it is a percentage, and the easiest way to turn a fraction into a percentage is a decimal, and that's why we need all three. Fraction's the easiest to find. We can turn it into a decimal to turn it into a percentage. The percentage is the easiest to understand. Just as an example so we can get why that makes sense. If I told you you got an 18 out of 25 on your test, is that good? Is that bad? What do we know? I mean, we missed a few problems, but 18 out of 25 doesn't sound terrible. If we look it up really quick, 18 out of 25 is a 72%. That's a C. So it's not great, but it's not the end of the world to get a C. However, if I just tell you 18 out of 25, it's kind of hard to understand that. That's why we're going to learn how do I take that fraction and turn it into a percentage. That 72% was way easier to understand as good, bad, somewhere in the middle. Fractions, not so much. But finding a fraction from these events is the easiest thing to do. The top number in your fraction will be how many times the event occurred. The event is what we're looking at. So for example, if I wanted a fraction representing the games the Seahawks won, I only care how many times did the Seahawks win. We're going to look up at the data and count the games where they won. So I'll scroll up really quick so we can see. This column here is the final score of the game. Your team score goes first. The opponent's score goes second, and you can see the wins and losses. If there's a W, your team won. If there's an L, your team lost. Since we want to know the wins, we're only going to look at games with a W. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They won 9 games. And that's what it says down here. The Seahawks won 9 games. What we then look at is how many total games did the Seahawks play. So we go back up to the stats, back up to our stat sheet and count, hey, how many games were there? From beginning to end of season, there were 17 games. So my fraction will be 9 out of 17. The 9 games I won go on top. The 17 games I played go on bottom. And for all of these right now, 17 will be your bottom number. Now that I have a fraction, the ultimate goal, remember, is to make that a percentage. Because 9 out of 17 doesn't sound great. I don't know. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I'm not 100%. I'm not confident in 9 out of 17 as a number. So let's turn it into a decimal. The trick to me for remembering how to convert a fraction into a decimal and just how to deal with fractions in general is anytime you see a fraction, I want you to think division. And that makes a lot of sense. If you look at the division sign being a line with a dot on top and a dot on bottom, and you look at a fraction as being a line with a number on top and a number on bottom, They're basically the same. It's a line with something on top and something on bottom. So anytime you see a fraction, you think division, and you've got it made. If we want to take our fraction 9 out of 17, wow, that's way too much highlighting, 9 out of 17, and convert it into a decimal, we would go 9 divided by 17. I saw a fraction, I thought division, and I got a big, long, spooky decimal. For convenience, round this off to 3 decimal places. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, right? Move that decimal 1, 2, 3 places after it is 529, and then that 4 rounds down. So we would stay at 0.529. That's it. That's our decimal. We took our fraction and divided. We've got a decimal. The last step is converting that decimal into a percentage. Probably the easiest part. Percentage means every 100 times. So you're going to take your decimal and go times 100. 0.529, multiply it by 100, and you get 52.9%. That's just over half. If you want to be the best team out there, you probably need to win more than half your games. However, winning at least half your games is probably a good start. So it's not terrible. It needs to be a lot better if you want to be the best team out there. And now we can see 9 out of 17. If that's what you scored on a test, that's failing. That's bad. You weren't sure what it meant as a fraction. As a percentage, it's very easy to tell what that means. Your job for this assignment is to repeat that process for all the different events we've got here. 10 different events. Seahawks win. We did that one together, right? We said it was 9 out of 17. They won 9 games, so I put 9 on top. There were 17 total games, so I put 17 on bottom. To get that as a decimal, if you want to leave a little note for yourself, you can, and just say divide. To remind yourself, I'm dividing. 9 divided by 17. We got 0.529 after we rounded. A percentage. If you want to remind yourself and say that's just times 100, go for it. It was 52.9%. And now I've got my fraction. I divided to make it a decimal. I multiplied by 100 to get my percentage. And you'll just repeat that process for every one of these events. Divide, multiply. Take your fraction, whatever you get, divide it to get a decimal, multiply to get the percentage. For the last little bit of this video, I'm going to talk quickly about all the different types of events you're going to see here. Up on our statistics page, we have a lot of numbers we're looking at. For each of those events, you're only looking at one column at a time, so you don't have to stress this whole page all at once, a lot of numbers. You're only looking at one at a time. This first one is your opponent, who you played against. That's not a number. That's not one we have to worry about today. The next one we've got is the final score. Now, the final score we do look at. We want to know a couple times, how many times did we score more than 20 points? How many times did our opponent score more than 20 points? How many times did we win? How many times did we lose? That all comes from this column. So reminder, the first number is your team. In this case, the Seattle Seahawks will always be the first number. So 17, 7, 23, 48, 32. Those are the Seahawks scores. Their opponent will always be the second score. 16, 27, 27, 45, 39. Those are all the opponent's scores. So if it asks, hey, how many times did the opponent score more than 20 points? You're looking at that second number. The next column is passing yards. That's how well your team did. Taking the ball, throwing it through the air, and catching it. How many yards did your team throw the ball through the air for? You can see this is usually a triple-digit number, often over 200, sometimes over 300. We will look at that. How many times was it more than 200? 200 is not more than 200, so it will not count when you have that problem. Rush yards. Your team grabbed the ball, handed it straight to a guy, and he took off running. How far did they get? You can see this is a much lower number. Anything over 100 is usually pretty good, and a couple times they got over 200, which is great. We're going to look at that. Turnovers is when your team has the ball, and one way or another gives it to the other team. So it could be I threw it and the other team caught it. I was running with it and dropped it and the other team picked it up. Whatever happened, the other team got the ball and I didn't score. That's bad. So you can see that's usually a really low number. A lot of ones, a 3, a couple 2s, a 0. The lower it is, the better. Pass yards allowed is how far your opponent threw the ball through the air. So the higher this number is, the farther your opponent traveled. That's usually bad for you. You can see in this first game, their opponent threw the ball 330 yards. That's great for them. That's really bad for us. We don't want teams to do that to us. And the last piece is rush yards allowed. So you can see, similar to us, it's always going to be around 100, maybe over 200. But the lower that number is, the better for us. That's how far your opponent grabbed the ball and just took off running with it. So your job down here in this events is to figure out what column are you looking at, whether it's pass yards. This one is running for more than 100 yards, so that's our rush yards. Turnovers, score, losing, whatever column you got to look for, and then count. How many times did my team do the thing that it's asking for? That'll be the top number in your fraction out of how many total games. That'll be the bottom number every time, no matter what team you're looking for. It should be 17 games on the bottom all the way through this page. And you got it.